two broken hearts living across the hall from each other, both too scared to admit they'd found exactly what they'd been waiting for. The elevator made that same annoying sound again as David pressed the button for the 8th floor. He had been living in the Riverside apartment complex for almost 2 years now, but some things never changed. The creaky elevator, the flickering light in the hallway, and the way Mrs. Peterson's cat would sit by the window every morning watching people leave for work. David liked his routine. Wake up at 6:30, coffee by 7, check emails, then head to the architectural firm downtown where he spent his days designing buildings that other people would call home. It was a good life, quiet and predictable. Just the way he wanted it after everything that happened back in his hometown. But routines have a way of changing when you least expect them. It started on a Tuesday evening in October. David was carrying groceries up the stairs because, naturally, the elevator had broken down again. He was juggling 2 heavy bags and trying to fish his keys from his pocket when he heard footsteps behind him. Need some help with those? The voice belonged to a woman he had seen around the building but never really talked to. She lived in apartment 8B, right across from his 8A. He knew this because their doors were directly facing each other, and sometimes he would hear music playing softly from her place when he came home late from work. "I got it, thanks," David replied, finally managing to get his door open. But as he turned around to be polite, one of the grocery bags decided to tear open right at that moment. Apples rolled everywhere, a jar of pasta sauce made a dangerous wobble, and his dignity pretty much disappeared. The woman laughed, but not in a mean way. It was the kind of laugh that made you want to laugh too, even when you were the one looking foolish. "Okay, now you definitely need help," she said, already bending down to collect the runaway apples. Her name was Isabella, and she worked at an art gallery downtown. She had moved into 8B about 6 months ago, she explained as they gathered up his scattered groceries. She had dark hair that she kept pushing behind her ear when she talked, and she wore paint-stained jeans like they were designer clothes. "I keep meaning to introduce myself properly," Isabella said, handing him the last apple. "But every time I see you, you're either rushing somewhere or talking on the phone." David realized she was right. He did tend to keep his head down in the hallways, always focused on getting somewhere else. It was a habit he had developed after moving here, a way of keeping his world small and manageable. "I'm not really good at the neighbor thing," he admitted. "Well, lucky for you, I'm good enough at it for both of us," she said with a grin. Over the next few weeks, David found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before, like how Isabella's car was often gone on weekends and how she sometimes got phone calls late at night that seemed to upset her. He would hear her voice through the thin walls, not the words, but the tone. Frustrated, tired, sometimes sad. He told himself it was none of his business. They were just neighbors who happened to help each other with dropped groceries. But when you live across the hall from someone, you start picking up on their patterns whether you mean to or not. Isabella worked different hours than he did. Sometimes, she would come home when he was leaving for his morning run, looking exhausted but still managing to wave. Other times, he would see her in the lobby dressed up for gallery events, looking like she belonged in one of those art magazines his sister used to read. The building had its quirks, and one of those quirks was that the power went out whenever there was a strong storm. It happened on a Thursday night in late October when the wind was howling outside like something from a scary movie. David was sitting in his living room reading by lamplight when everything went dark. He fumbled around for the flashlight he kept in his kitchen drawer, and that's when he heard a knock on his door. Isabella stood in the hallway holding a candle, looking like something out of an old movie. "Power's out in my place too," she said. "You wouldn't happen to have any extra candles, would you? I only had this one, and it's not going to last very long." David invited her in, and they ended up sitting on his couch talking by candlelight while the storm raged outside. It was strange how different someone could seem when you couldn't see them clearly. In the flickering light, Isabella seemed less put together, more real somehow. She told him about her job at the gallery, how she had always dreamed of working with art but never expected it to involve so much paperwork and dealing with difficult artists. David found himself talking about architecture, about how he loved designing spaces where people would make memories, even though his own life felt pretty empty of memorable moments lately. They didn't talk about personal things, not really, but there was something comfortable about sitting in the dark with someone, sharing the same uncertain situation. When the power came back on 2 hours later, the sudden brightness felt almost rude. "Well," Isabella said, blowing out her candle. That was unexpectedly nice. After she left, David's apartment felt quieter than usual. He realized he had enjoyed having company, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. It made him think about how careful he had become about letting people into his space, into his life. The next morning, there was a small potted plant outside, his door with a note. "Thanks for the candles and the company. Your neighbor, Isabella." David smiled as he picked up the plant. Maybe being good at the neighbor thing wasn't so complicated after all. Maybe it just required being open to the unexpected moments when grocery bags tear and storms knock out the power, creating opportunities for two strangers to discover they might not be so different after all. As he got ready for work that morning, David found himself wondering what other surprises might be waiting in the routine he had built so carefully around himself. For the first time in a long while, the idea of something unexpected didn't scare him. It actually felt kind of exciting. The plant Isabella had given him was still alive 3 weeks later, which David considered a small miracle. He had never been good with plants, but this little green thing seemed determined to survive despite his inexperience. He had placed it on his kitchen windowsill where it could get morning sunlight, and somehow it was actually growing new leaves. November brought the kind of cold that made you want to stay inside with hot coffee and thick blankets. David had settled into a new routine that included brief conversations with Isabella whenever their paths crossed. Nothing deep, just friendly neighbor talk about the weather, the building's ongoing maintenance issues, or recommendations for good coffee shops in the area. But he was starting to notice things. Like how Isabella's phone conversations seemed to be getting more frequent and more heated. Her voice would carry through the thin walls, not the words exactly, but the emotion behind them. Frustration, disappointment, sometimes anger. David tried not to listen, but when you live right across from someone, privacy becomes a relative concept. The building's heating system had always been unreliable, but this winter it seemed determined to break everyone's spirit. David came home from work on a particularly cold Thursday to find a note taped to his door. "Hey neighbor, my radiator decided to quit on me today. Building management says they can't get someone out until tomorrow. Do you happen to have any extra blankets I could borrow? I promise to return them in the same condition. Thanks, Isabella." David knocked on her door immediately. When she opened it, he could see his breath in the air behind her. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You can't stay here tonight. It's too cold." Isabella wrapped her arms around herself. She was wearing 2 sweaters and still looked frozen. "I'll be fine. I've got plenty of blankets and I can make tea." "Come on," David said. "My heater is working fine. You can stay on my couch tonight, and tomorrow when they fix yours, you can go back to being an independent neighbor who doesn't need help." She looked like she wanted to argue, but another blast of cold air from her apartment made the decision for her. "Okay, but just for tonight. And I'm making dinner to pay you back." That evening, David learned that Isabella could cook. Not just basic cooking, but the kind that filled his apartment with smells that made him realize how boring his usual dinner routine had become. She had brought over ingredients from her place and somehow turned his simple kitchen into something that felt alive and warm. "So what's your story?" Isabella asked while stirring something that smelled like heaven in a pot. 2 years in this building and I've never seen you with visitors. No friends stopping by, no family visits. Are you hiding from someone or just really good at being mysterious?" David paused from setting the table. It wasn't an unfair question, but it hit closer to home than he expected. "Not hiding exactly, just keeping things simple." "Simple can be good," Isabella said. "But sometimes simple is just another word for lonely." They ate dinner on his small table by the window, and David found himself talking about things he hadn't discussed with anyone in months. His work at the architectural firm, his love for designing buildings, even some stories from college that he had almost forgotten. Isabella listened in a way that made him feel heard, not just tolerated. "What about you?" David asked. "Those phone calls you get don't sound like they're making you very happy." Isabella's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "You can hear those?" Walls aren't exactly soundproof. I don't listen on purpose, but sometimes the tone comes through. Is everything okay?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city lights. "I've been dating someone long distance for about a year. He's in Chicago, working at some big company that keeps him busy all the time. Lately it feels like I'm dating his voicemail more than him." "That sounds hard." "It is. Especially when you start wondering if the person you fell for even exists anymore, or if they're just too busy to remember you're waiting for them to have time." After dinner, they watched a movie on David's couch. Isabella fell asleep halfway through, curled up under one of his blankets. David found himself watching her instead of the screen, thinking about how different his apartment felt with someone else in it. Not crowded or invaded, just less empty. The next morning, Isabella made coffee and breakfast before the maintenance crew arrived to fix her radiator. "Thank you," she said as she gathered her things, "for the warmth and the company. It's been a while since I had either." "You're welcome here any time," David said, and meant it. Over the following days, their friendship shifted into something deeper. Isabella would knock on his door when she had leftover food to share. David would offer to pick up groceries for her when he was going to the store. Small gestures that created a rhythm between their separate lives. One evening, David heard Isabella on another phone call that ended with what sounded like crying. Without thinking too much about it, he knocked on her door. "Want some company?" he asked when she answered, her eyes red but her smile forced. "Actually, yes. I could really use a friend right now." They sat on her couch this time, and Isabella told him about her relationship, about feeling like she was trying to hold on to something that was already gone. David shared more about his own past, about why he had moved here and why he kept his life so carefully controlled. "Maybe we're both better at taking care of other people than we are at taking care of ourselves," Isabella said. As the weeks passed, David realized his daily routine had expanded to include Isabella in ways that felt natural. She had become the person he wanted to tell about good days at work or funny things he noticed around the city. She was the reason he looked forward to coming home, not just to his apartment but to this building where someone was glad to see him. Neither of them talked about what was happening between them, but David could feel it. In the way Isabella's smile seemed more genuine when she saw him, in how their conversations had grown longer and more personal, in the comfortable silences that filled the space between words. Winter was getting colder, but David's world was feeling warmer than it had in years. December came with snow that turned the city into something from a postcard. David had always liked winter, but this year felt different. Maybe it was because he had someone to share it with, even if neither of them had put a name to what was happening between them. Isabella's relationship troubles had gotten worse. David could tell because the phone calls had become less frequent, but when they did happen, they were shorter and more final sounding. She didn't talk about it much, but he could see it in the way she carried herself, like someone preparing for something difficult. On a Tuesday evening in mid-December, David was working on some architectural plans at his kitchen table when he heard Isabella's door slam. Not the kind of slam that happens by accident, but the kind that comes from pure frustration. A few minutes later, he heard her crying. He sat there for 10 minutes trying to focus on his work and give her privacy, but friendship sometimes means knowing when privacy isn't what someone needs. He knocked softly on her door. "Isabella, you okay?" The door opened, and he could see she had been crying hard. Her hair was messy, her eyes were red, and she looked like someone who had just been through something terrible. "I ended it," she said simply. "Finally ended it." David didn't need to ask what she meant. "Do you want to talk about it?" She nodded and let him in. Her apartment was messier than usual, with tissues scattered around and her laptop still open on the table. David could see the black screen where a video call had been. "He forgot my birthday last week," Isabella said, sitting down heavily on her couch. Not just forgot to call, but actually forgot the day existed. When I mentioned it today, he said he was busy with a work project and could we celebrate it next month when things calmed down. David sat down beside her, not too close but close, enough that she knew he was there. I realized I've been making excuses for him for months. He's busy, he's stressed, he's got important things happening at work. But you know what? I have important things happening too. I have feelings and needs and a life that matters. I'm tired of feeling like I have to apologize for existing. She started crying again, but this time it seemed different. Not just sad, but relieved too. You did the right thing, David said quietly. Did I? Or did I just give up on something that could have worked? Isabella, look at me. David waited until she met his eyes. In the months I've known you, I've watched you become smaller every time you talk to him. That's not love, that's just habit. They talked until late that night. Isabella told him about how the relationship had started good but gradually turned into something where she was always waiting. Waiting for calls, waiting for visits, waiting for him to have time for her. David found himself getting angry at a man he had never met, someone who had been lucky enough to have Isabella's attention and had wasted it. I keep wondering if there's something wrong with me, Isabella said. Like maybe I'm too needy or too demanding. There's nothing wrong with wanting someone to be happy to hear from you, David replied. There's nothing wrong with wanting to feel like you matter to the person you're dating. The next few days were quiet. Isabella threw herself into work at the gallery, and David gave her space to process everything that had happened. But he made sure she knew he was there if she needed anything. Small gestures, like leaving coffee and pastries outside her door in the morning or texting her funny pictures he found online. A week after the breakup, Isabella knocked on David's door with a bottle of wine and a determined look on her face. I want to celebrate, she said. Celebrate what? My freedom, my stupidity for staying in that relationship so long, the fact that I finally stood up for myself. Pick one. They sat on David's couch drinking wine and talking about everything except her ex-boyfriend. Isabella seemed lighter somehow, like she had put down something heavy she didn't realize she was carrying. David found himself laughing more than he had in months. Can I tell you something? Isabella said as the evening got late. Of course. Being your neighbor has been the best part of moving to this building. Actually, it's been the best part of this whole year. David felt something shift in his chest. Isabella, I know the timing is terrible. I just got out of a relationship. You're clearly dealing with your own stuff from the past. But I need you to know that the way you've been there for me, the way you listen and make me feel like I matter, that's what I thought love was supposed to feel like. They looked at each other across the small space between them on the couch. David could feel his heart beating faster. He had been trying not to admit to himself how much he cared about Isabella, how much he looked forward to seeing her every day, how much better his life had become with her in it. The timing is terrible, he agreed. The worst, Isabella said, but she was smiling. And we're neighbors. That could get complicated. So complicated. And I'm not good at this kind of thing. Relationships. I tend to mess them up. Well, I apparently date people who forget I exist, so we're both pretty bad at it. David reached over and tucked a piece of hair behind Isabella's ear. The same gesture he had watched her do dozens of times. But maybe we could be bad at it. Together. Isabella leaned closer. Maybe we could. They almost kissed then. David could feel the pull toward her, could see in her eyes that she felt it too. But something held him back. Fear, maybe. Or the knowledge that once they crossed this line, there would be no going back to being just neighbors who helped each other with groceries and broken heaters. I don't want to be your rebound, David said softly. You wouldn't be, Isabella replied. David, what I feel for you isn't about getting over someone else. It's about finding someone who makes me want to be brave enough to try again. The snow was falling outside David's window, creating a quiet, private world around them. He realized that somewhere between dropped apples and shared dinners and late-night conversations, he had fallen completely for his neighbor. Not just because she was beautiful or funny or kind, but because she made him want to stop hiding from the possibility of happiness. So what do we do now? Isabella asked. David took her hand. I think we take it slow. I think we figure it out as we go, and I think we stop pretending that what's happening between us is just friendship. Isabella squeezed his hand. I'd like that. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the city in fresh white. Inside David's apartment, two people who had been carefully guarding their hearts decided it might be time to stop being so careful. 2 weeks had passed since that snowy evening when everything changed between David and Isabella. They were taking things slow, like they had promised each other, but slow felt different when every small moment carried weight. A brush of hands when passing coffee, longer hugs when saying goodnight, the way Isabella would rest her head on David's shoulder when they watched movies together. David found himself thinking about her constantly. Not in the obsessive way he remembered from past relationships, but in a warm, comfortable way that made even ordinary moments feel special, like how Isabella hummed while doing dishes, or the way she left little notes on his door when she had to leave early for work. The gallery where Isabella worked was preparing for a major exhibition, which meant she was staying late most nights and coming home exhausted. David started leaving dinner outside her door on those evenings. Nothing fancy, just things he knew she liked. Soup when it was cold, sandwiches from the deli she had mentioned loving, sometimes just a thermos of good coffee with a note that said, "Thought you might need this." One Thursday night, Isabella knocked on his door at nearly midnight. David opened it to find her still in her work clothes, looking tired but excited. "Sorry it's so late," she said. "But I have news and I couldn't wait until tomorrow to tell you." "Good news or bad news?" "Good news. Great news, actually." Isabella's eyes were bright despite her exhaustion. "The exhibition opens next week, and my boss said I can invite anyone I want to the opening night. It's a big deal, David. Important. People from the art world, critics, collectors, and I want you there." David felt something warm spread through his chest. "You want me there?" "Of course I do. You're the person I want to share good things with." The opening was scheduled for the following Friday. David spent more time than he cared to admit thinking about what to wear, which made him laugh at himself. When had he started caring so much about making a good impression on Isabella's work friends? That Friday evening, David arrived at the gallery to find it transformed. Soft lighting, elegant people in expensive clothes, waiters carrying trays of wine and small appetizers. It was a world he had never been part of, and for a moment he felt out of place. Then he saw Isabella across the room, wearing a black dress that made her look like she belonged in a museum herself. She was talking to a group of people, gesturing animatedly about one of the paintings. When she caught sight of David, her whole face lit up, and suddenly the fancy gallery and important people didn't matter anymore. "You came," she said when she reached him, taking his hands in hers. "Of course I came. You asked me to." Isabella introduced him to her colleagues, her boss, even some of the artists whose work was being displayed. David found himself enjoying conversations about art and creativity, topics he never thought he knew much about. But Isabella had a way of making him feel like his opinions mattered, even in a room full of experts. Later in the evening, when the crowd had thinned out, Isabella found David standing in front of a painting that had captured his attention. "What do you think of it?" she asked. "It reminds me of something," David said, studying the canvas. "Like the feeling you get when you're waiting for something good to happen, but you're not sure if it will." Isabella moved closer to him. "And what if it does happen? What if the good thing you're waiting for is right there, and all you have to do is reach for it?" David turned to look at her, and suddenly they weren't talking about the painting anymore. The gallery was nearly empty now, just a few people finishing their wine and quiet conversations in the distance. "Isabella," David said softly. "I've been thinking about what you said about not wanting to be my rebound," she said. "But David, you have to know that what I feel for you isn't about getting over someone else. It's about finding someone who makes me feel like myself again." They stood there looking at each other, surrounded by beautiful art. But David thought Isabella was more beautiful than anything else in the room. "I've been waiting for the right moment," Isabella continued. "But maybe there isn't a perfect moment." Maybe there's just this moment right now and the choice to be brave enough to take it. David reached up to touch her face gently. I care about you so much it scares me. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind that means it matters. The gallery was closing around them, but neither of them seemed to notice. They were lost in each other, in this moment they had been building toward for weeks. Come home. With me? Isabella whispered. David's heart was beating so fast he was sure she could hear it. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. They walked back to their building in comfortable silence, hands linked, both of them knowing that tonight would change everything. Not because of what might happen, but because they had finally stopped waiting for permission to want each other. At Isabella's door, she turned to face him. David, I need you to know something. Whatever happens between us tonight, it's not about loneliness or rebound or anything like that. It's because I've fallen for you, completely and entirely. David pulled her closer. I've fallen for you too. So completely that I don't remember what my life was like before you knocked on my door asking for candles. Isabella smiled. That same smile that had made him want to laugh even when he was embarrassed about his scattered groceries. No more waiting. No more waiting, David agreed. She opened her door and took his hand, leading him inside. Her apartment was dim, lit only by the city lights coming through her windows. But David could see everything he needed to see in Isabella's eyes. Trust, affection, and something deeper that made his chest tight with emotion. This wasn't just about physical attraction, though David was certainly attracted to her. This was about two people who had been careful with their hearts, deciding to be careless together. It was about choosing vulnerability over safety, connection over isolation. Isabella moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, could feel the warmth of her skin. Are you sure about this? David asked one more time because he needed to be certain. Isabella's answer was to kiss him softly at first, then deeper, and David knew with absolute certainty that waiting was over. 3 months had passed since that night at the gallery, and David's life had changed in ways he was still discovering. Waking up in Isabella's apartment had become as natural as waking up in his own. Their morning routines had merged into something that worked for both of them. Isabella made better coffee, but David was faster at making breakfast. She liked to read the news on her phone while eating, and he preferred to plan his day in silence. They had officially become David and Isabella in their friend circles, though they still maintained their separate apartments. Neither of them had suggested moving in together permanently, but the line between his space and hers had become beautifully blurred. David was learning things about relationships he had never understood before, like how much better food tasted when you cooked it with someone else, how having someone to tell about your day made even boring work stories feel important, how you could disagree about small things like what movie to watch and somehow feel closer afterward. But he was also learning that real relationships came with real challenges. The first test came on a Tuesday morning in late March. David was getting ready for work when Isabella got a call that made her face go pale. That was Tyler, she said after hanging up. Tyler was her ex-boyfriend, the one from Chicago. David felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his voice calm. What did he want? He's moving back to the city. Got a job offer he says he can't refuse. He wants to meet up and talk. David set down his coffee mug carefully. Talk about what? He says he made a mistake. Says he realizes now what he lost. When I ended things. Isabella was looking at David with worried eyes. He wants another chance. The old David, the one who had lived alone and kept his world small, might have panicked. Might have assumed this meant Isabella would leave him for someone she had history with. But this David, the one who had learned to trust, who had experienced what real partnership felt like, surprised himself. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to ignore his call and pretend it never happened, Isabella said immediately. But that feels like the coward's way out. So meet with him. Get the closure you need. Isabella stared at him. You're okay with that? I'm terrified of it, David admitted. But Isabella, if you don't deal with this now, it's going to hang over us. And besides, I trust you. I trust what we have. Isabella met with Tyler the following weekend at a coffee shop downtown. David spent those 2 hours trying to focus on organizing his apartment and failing completely. When Isabella came back, she looked exhausted but relieved. "How did it go?" David asked. "Exactly like I thought it would." He apologized for everything, said he was different now, promised he would do better. Isabella sat down on David's couch and leaned against him. "And you know what I realized while he was talking?" "What?" "That I didn't miss him at all. Not even a little bit. The person I used to be when I was with him, always waiting and hoping and making excuses. I don't want to be that person anymore." David felt relief wash over him, but also something deeper. Pride in Isabella for knowing her own worth, and gratitude that she had chosen him. The second test came a month later, and this time it was David's turn to face his past. He was at work when his assistant told him someone was there to see him. David looked up from his computer to see Rachel, his ex-fiancée from his hometown. She looked exactly the same as she had 2 years ago, when she had chosen her career opportunity over their engagement. "Hello, David," Rachel said, settling into the chair across from his desk like no time had passed at all. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" "I got transferred to the regional office. I'll be working in the city now." She smiled that same confident smile that had once made David's heart skip. "I was hoping we could get dinner sometime. Catch up properly." David felt like he was looking at a photograph of his old life. Rachel represented everything he used to think he wanted. Ambition, success, a perfectly planned future. But sitting there looking at her, all he could think about was getting home to Isabella. "I'm seeing someone," David said simply. "I heard, from mutual friends back home. But David, we had something special. Don't you think it's worth exploring whether we could have it again?" 2 years ago, David might have been tempted. Rachel had been his plan, his future. Before, she had decided her career was more important than their relationship. But now, having experienced what it felt like to be with someone who chose him every day, who made him feel valued and heard and appreciated, he couldn't imagine going backward. "Rachel, I hope the job goes well for you. But no, I don't think dinner is a good idea." That evening, David told Isabella about Rachel's visit. He watched her face carefully, looking for signs of jealousy or insecurity. But Isabella just listened, thoughtfully. "Are you curious about what might happen if you saw her again?" Isabella asked. "Honestly, no. What we had was good for who I was then, but I'm not that person anymore. And what you and I have is better than anything I had with her." Isabella smiled, but it was a thoughtful smile. "Can I tell you something? When Tyler called, part of me was curious too. Not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I was really over him. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. But when I saw him, I realized I wasn't trying to prove I was over him. I was trying to prove that what we have is real. And it is, David. What we have is the most real thing I've ever experienced." They spent that evening talking about their pasts, about the people they used to be and the people they were becoming together. David realized that loving Isabella hadn't just changed his daily routine or his living situation. It had changed his understanding of what love could be. Summer came with long evenings and the kind of heat that made you want to stay inside with cold drinks and fans blowing. David and Isabella had fallen into a comfortable rhythm of spending weekends together, exploring the city or just enjoying each other's company. One Saturday evening in July, they were having dinner on Isabella's small balcony when she said something that caught David off guard. "I've been thinking about us," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. David felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Good thinking or concerning thinking? Good thinking. Great thinking, actually. Isabella put down her fork and looked at him seriously. "David, I know we said we were taking things slow, and we have. But somewhere along the way, slow turned into just right. You're the person I want to come home to every day. You're the person I want to share good news with and bad news with and all the boring in-between news with." David reached across the small table and took her hand. "I feel the same way." I know your lease is up at the end of next month, Isabella continued. And I know this might be moving too fast, but what if you didn't renew it? What if we tried living together for real? David had been thinking the same thing for weeks, but hearing Isabella say it out loud made his heart race with excitement rather than fear. The old David would have worried about losing his independence, about what would happen if things went wrong. This David was more concerned about missing the opportunity to build something beautiful with someone he loved. Are you asking me to move in with you? David asked. I'm asking if you want to stop pretending we don't already live together and make it official. David laughed, realizing she was right. Most of his clothes were already at Isabella's place. His toothbrush had been on her bathroom counter for weeks. They had been gradually combining their lives without making a formal decision about it. Yes, David said. I want to make it official. Isabella's smile was brighter than the city lights spread out below them. Really? Really? I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to argue about what to watch on Netflix and take turns doing dishes and figure out whose family we visit for holidays. I want all of it, Isabella. That night, as they lay in Isabella's bed planning how to combine their furniture and their lives, David thought about the man he had been when he first moved to this building. Careful, guarded, content with a small, safe world. He was grateful to that man for being wise enough to help a neighbor collect scattered apples, because that simple act of kindness had led to everything good in his life now. No more waiting, Isabella whispered in the dark, echoing the words that had changed everything between them. No more waiting, David agreed, pulling her closer and thinking about all the tomorrows they would build together.